Well, thank you, and Sharon, you won't be able to buy it, well, you can buy my book, but it's available for free to download. All the stuff I publish these days is, and I will have the URL. So thank you very much for inviting me, my first time to Oklahoma, and I really do appreciate the irony of me coming all the way from Canada to tell you how you can influence Africa without going there on a jet plane like I've just finished doing. So you'll have to forgive me for not walking the talk and for actually being here, but it is a real pleasure. You might think it's strange that a guy from northern Canada gets to talk about Africa too, because I have never lived in Africa. But I've been there 3 or 4 times to talk to distance educators at the African Council of Distance Education, and been editing a journal that we have special issues on distance education in Africa. It's a really happening place when it comes to solving problems that you cannot solve the old way. And you'll see in some of the data that I show you that you know, the opportunities to build universities, to build colleges, training or trades colleges, for the demand that's there and the resources there, to do it the old way is not going to happen. We will not build the number of universities that we have in North America per capita. But that doesn't mean that people are going to go uneducated. And I think you'll see from some of these slides that people all over the world are leapfrogging over the physical reality of a campus. And you remember about 10 years ago they said, oh, half the people in the world have never made a telephone call. Well, you can't say that anymore. And it's not because they used to talk about how there isn't enough landlines in Africa. Well, they don't need landlines. We popped right over that, leapfrog over that into cellular phones. And I think that kind of technology is going to make the connections between us globally. And I hope that this talk will show you what's happening now in Africa, but as well the wonders of tourism and our guests here. There are many ways to go. Okay. So what is distance? Does it work? Does it save money? And then I've got some slides of different things that are happening in Africa today. Okay, so what is distance education? It's access to learning where the source of the information and the learners are separated by time or distance. So it's the same kind of education, the same kind of outcomes, the same kind of, sometimes the same kind of teacher relationship, but sometimes vastly different relationships. And it usually involves working towards a degree or a certificate. But I think you're seeing that now with informal learning, where people have webinars, where people go and watch YouTube videos, that we're starting to see learning get away from teaching at a distance through newspapers. Then we went into radio, television, and just recently we've gotten into internet-based distance education. So it's not something new, it's something we've had around for a long time. But now if you look at the types of distance education, here's our regular education, just the normal face-to-face classroom. And then you get where you're transporting that classroom to students in their homes or maybe in offices or groups like that. But you can also have individual coaching and mentoring, which is a huge opportunity for the diaspora. Sorry, I can't pronounce that either. But here's the new one here, is all of the ways to form communities, to have learning communities focused on a topic that are outside of a formal education, with blogs and wikis and chats and threaded discussions. And then you can get the canned content, where you make a lecture, you make a presentation, or you show a game or simulation or whatever, and then you have it streamed over the internet so that people can do self-paced, so they can take it when they want. You don't have to wait till September or January, they can start whenever they want. And finally, just a performance support where the knowledge is encapsulated and on your machine for when you need it. So there's all kinds of new kinds of distance education that are emerging. This is from University of Zimbabwe. And this is from an African perspective, what they see they will get out of it. And there's always a danger when you import experts to come in, teach your students that, where's the job for me? You know, what has this done for my local community when I'm just importing expertise? And so we always have to watch that and balance the local need plus the expertise that you bring in. But here's what the staff say in Zimbabwe. It'll give them in increased enrollment, which will improve the financial viability of their institution. And this is when they're delivering distance education to people outside of the big cities of Zimbabwe. It is important for faculty development. One of the things we know with distance education in North America is that the teachers who teach it, they bring their new knowledge of media use and asynchronous learning, they bring it into the classroom. So it starts you thinking differently about what teaching and learning is all about. Increase in staff income through writing and creating tests, and gives faculty a chance to revive courses where there isn't enough students at any one place. That's a big problem we have in Canada. We have a huge spread out, and so if we can get 2 students from this town and 4 from that town and 6 from here, we can start to build a learning community, and it's been a huge benefit for us. Here are the means. That's kind of an idea that drives distance education. And the first and most important one has always been, it really is about access. It's giving people a chance that they haven't had a chance before. And it used to be, that was, at least especially in Canada, that it was because people lived too far away from a university or to a college. That's not the case anymore. Most distance educators live in big cities. They have universities there, but they're shifting time and they're shifting place, or they're saving money, or they have kids at home, or a mother to take care of, or whatever. And so distance education is about increasing opportunity and access, but it doesn't mean you have to live in, a little farm way out in the wilderness. But there's also new means, and especially you see a lot of American companies are getting into adult education, distance education, things like the University of Phoenix, and others who see this as an opportunity to make money, to have, I'm not going to have to build a campus, I'm going to create a campus, and I'm going to make a lot of money. So you get these 2 things, one altruistic, save the world, and the other make money for me, and they're merging in the e-learning world right now. And the sort of the neoliberal that the private sector can do it better than any public sector, which is again questionable. But one of the problems is that sometimes an African scholar from South Africa who says that it's unfair for us to think that somebody who hasn't had any preparation, has a very poor high school, to just dump them into, give them a bunch of books, and then expect them to succeed without any student support, and then call themselves a failure if they don't do it. So I think we have to realize that just because information is available does not mean it's going to work in all of the contexts that can be delivered to. So I've just picked up some recent figures from the USA, and you might say, well, these are American figures about this online education. What does that have to do with Africa? But as I said earlier, I think that you can extrapolate what's going to happen in the near future in Africa, because the need is so much greater there than it is here for education. So it shows 18.6 million college students are taking an online course. Now, most of these students are not living in rural areas. In fact, they're full-time students on a regular campus, like the University of Oklahoma. But they're taking 1 or 2 courses online. And they do that so they can do part-time work, so they can have more flexibility, so they can try something new, so if they don't like their professor, they can change to a different one, all kinds of reasons. But in North America, the universities are waking up to the fact that there's a huge opportunity because students like to learn in this way. They're not being forced to, they're liking it, and they're choosing it. And then, so they asked these students, these are students who are taking courses, they said, well, if you could come to a lecture, if you could come to a real university, how many of you would like to do that? And they said that 21% of them, 1 out of 5 said, never. I don't want to. You don't get it. The reason I'm taking this is so that I don't have to come to a synchronous session. I want to try something different. But another 15%, almost the same number, said, yeah, I'd love it. I would come to campus if I had the opportunity. So what is it telling us is that distance learning works for different people. And it depends on their stage of life and what's happening around their life and their past experiences. It's not a universal solution. But they also found that it's very cost sensitive. A lot of people are taking online education because it's generally cheaper. And you find that around the world, the open universities usually have tuitions that's a half to a third of what it is at a regular university. So there's a huge financial incentive, which means opportunity for poor people in these countries as well. But if we were to say that you're being forced to take distance education, we would get resistance. Some students say, you know, I paid for a real campus education, what do I get? You know, and so some people have high expectations for the traditional way. And I think that's especially true in developing countries where university system and access to it is a real privilege for the elite. And so people want to do it. Regardless of whether it's better education or costs less, there is a status about going to a face-to-face university. And then there's a lot of teachers who are really resistant as well because they say, look, the reason I'm a teacher is because I like being in the classroom. That's who I am, as a classroom teacher. So it means that they have to change if they're going to meet this need and do it with enthusiasm as well. And then some people say, well, the only reason, I've said this point before, but they're taking education because they want to go to an online experience. They said, if you could go on campus, would you do it? And 30% said no, they never would. 25% said they would. I'm going to skip over this just to show you, well, there's different models. There's kind of where distance education, where you study all by yourself, alone, all the time. Then there's distance education where you meet every Tuesday by a web conference with a class. And what the slide shows is that the number of students who like all three of these models is about equal. So there isn't one kind of distance education that will meet all the needs. There's huge variety in the students and in the type of courses. But the other thing we find is that some people think, well, if I could only take my courses and ram it down the telephone line, then everybody would be happy. And it just doesn't work that way. You have to change your thinking about what works, what you can do, what students want, what your subject discipline wants in the tradition of your teaching. And that requires change. This gets back to the current challenge in distance education and focus on the processes of Western social, cultural, and educational construct. And whenever we export our knowledge from the diaspora, we're exporting not only our heritage from many centuries back, but we're exporting our values that we have today. And those values may not fit with the values that you're teaching into. So I think that distance education, by spanning the geography, ends up getting meshed up with social imperialism, colonialism, all of the negative things too that we have to guard against, to make sure that we're talking to people in their context, and they will appreciate where you're coming from, but you have to be explicit and open and ready to listen as well as to talk. As I said, distance education is cheaper, partly because you don't have to pay the buildings, partly because you can get instructors from all over the place. But the government realizes that, and so in South Africa, they only give the institution 50% as much per student, because they say, you should be able to do it cheaper. And so that kind of makes a disincentive to the universities. They say, well, if I'm teaching the same student, why should I get half the money from the government as if he was on campus? So there's a tension between how much should distance education cost. But this is the old-fashioned way of distance education, the industrial model, where you produce some very good, high-quality video or textbooks or something like that, and then you go to distance learning centers. Most African universities have distance learning centers now where they deliver the content out, and then it goes into the individual. And the trick is that there's a high fixed cost at this end, but there's a low cost per student at the other end. And you have to have enough students to make it worthwhile, to make that model work. Now here's the current e-learning model as practiced in North America. It's basically one instructor with maybe 20 or 30 students. They don't exactly look like that, but it gets the idea. And this model is not very cost effective. It's the max number of screens you can get around is about 30, 35, maybe 40 students. And so if you have this kind of a model of e-learning, if this is what you're thinking, it's not really scalable. You can't go up to 100, 1,000, 10,000. very easily. So this is one of the challenges, and when we talk about North American model of distance education, it's not that much cheaper than the traditional classroom, especially if you can put 200 people in a lecture theater or something like that. I'm going to skip that. Okay, there's a bunch of assumptions that push behind distance education. This is from a South African writer who says, you have to believe that technology-enhanced distance education is the answer to quality technical delivery. There's a real technological bias that somehow the technology is going to solve the problem. It can solve many problems, but it also leads to new problems. And so there's no magic solutions. Open learning is the idea that we shouldn't have to have prerequisites. You shouldn't have to, have barriers. You should remove them as much as you want. And as I said, sometimes you remove so many barriers that you enroll people who are doomed to failure. So it's challenging that way. Student support is a critical issue, and just giving people boxes of books or videos to watch is not the kind of support that leads to high graduation. It leads to high dropout. And the distance education is not necessarily more affordable. It really depends. So this is just some ideas of the demand for education in Africa. You can see, exponential growth in many of these countries, and none of these countries are building universities at the rate of which the demand is growing. And then that is growing from increased populations, but more importantly, from people having higher expectations and wanting an education in order to get ahead. And as I said, these countries cannot afford to build universities to meet this demand, and they will not. 84 to 95% of candidates seeking admissions every year never get admitted into Nigerian universities. So, what's happening with distance education in Africa as we speak today? The 16th is the last day of the 26th International Congress of Distance Education. The biggest world organization is meeting in South Africa for the first time in Africa. So the focus of distance educators is moving rapidly to Africa. There's some really interesting NGOs working. This is Sadie from South Africa, and their big thing is open educational resources, where they take textbooks and courses, and the South African model is, let's not hire textbook publishers to try to get books out to these schools, because the books disappear and they never get there. And they said, instead, and they're very expensive, and we can't afford to have new ones every year. So let's hire teachers to come together, create textbooks, and we'll publish them ourselves in paper and electronically, and we'll make them free to all of these schools. And so if you think of how many textbooks there are lying around this country, unused, in schools, and what a waste it is, even within our own school system, is that I think there's huge opportunity. And organizations like Sadie are at the front of that. This is another one, the African Virtual University headquartered in Kenya. It's been around for about 15 years. It started with a whole bunch of World Bank money to do satellite-based video delivery to 5 or 6 capitals. It was a tremendous failure. It cost a lot of money. The learning centers never got used. The cities that they went to already had universities. The universities thought this was big competition that they didn't want, and it was a big mess. And now they've completely reorganized, and what they're doing is helping African universities develop their own distance education programs and supporting them with content and activities rather than competing with them. And so they've learned a lot, but they're still a healthy organization. This is a teacher education program, an NGO out of the UK, also from Kenya, and what they do is they deliver remotely by radio and television to teachers. Many teachers in Africa, primary teachers especially, don't have much higher education at all themselves, and so there's a huge demand for it. Another Kenya-based NGO delivering courses, they make, one of their things is, we're going to make it so you can take this course online, but we're also distributing it on CD-ROM and other media so that you can take it off the grid. We're seeing theological training. You can get a divinity degree at a distance in many of these countries. This is a particular subject that is of high interest, obviously, but as well, you don't need the computer labs or the web labs to function, so it seems to be particularly well fit to distance education. There's all kinds of new private operators moving in. Here's the University of Africa. Again, these are entrepreneurs who are thinking that they will not build campuses, but they will reach out via distance education. There's lots of evidence. This is from an article from a friend of mine from from the Nigerian Open University, and they're talking about distance education as a strategy for women. There's e-learning in Africa program to get more women involved in ICT. And South Africa is probably the leader in this whole area. 40% of their students are distance education students now, and they're projected so that all of their students will have a distance education experience, even if they go to university or are exposed to it. And this just gives you a picture of the global situation. Here's the big universities in the world, the open universities. Indira Gandhi National Open University in India has 3.5 million students in it. So this is probably 100 times bigger than the largest university in North America. And the Open University of China is also very big. 2.7 million, Pakistan 3.2 million, Turkey, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Korea, UK, and you can see there's one university, the University of South Africa, with 328,000 students, is sort of in that league. But what you can see here is that in Asia, particularly, they're far ahead in realizing they're not going to build universities, and so they're starting to build out. What's happened in most African universities is they're having distance education departments rather than standalone open universities like you see here. And that has advantages and disadvantages, as I'm sure you can imagine. If you work at a university, getting them to change is a challenge. These are the list. There's 39 institutions who are members of the Council for Distance Education. And you can see again, University of South Africa probably the most influential in this organization. But they meet every 2 years, and they share content and they share expertise around. I'm getting near the end. Open educational resources is a huge thing, as I said. And instead of creating an object and selling your rights to a publisher, especially university professors, like we always have to publish books in order to succeed, and you think, well, I'll get a publisher. And like I got a check for one of my books the other day, it was for $37. But fortunately, for royalties, but fortunately they were American dollars, not Canadian dollars. So I'm feeling good. I can almost take my wife out to dinner. You do not make a lot of money. And that's why the last 3 books I published, I said, I am not going down that route. And so I put them online through an academic publisher, and anybody can download them. And again, I got I think $400 check for the last one, Canadian. But the downloads of some of those books are in the hundreds of thousands because they're available. And so much of our stuff we hide, or we publish a book and we hold on to it all the time. And what does it get you? Compared to the good it can do. And so now we have Creative Commons licensing that allows you to put that license on and say, I am holding the copyright to this, it's my book, but I am licensing you to use it for these purposes. And it's a terrific system that we have now from America. Open educational Africa, there's whole health networks and others who are building on this open educational stuff. And, okay, my last item is a MOOC. How many people have heard of a MOOC, a massive open online course? Put your hand up. Okay, just a few. Well, and I could ask how many people have taken a MOOC, and maybe there's 1 or 2 who have. How many people finished the MOOC? Now, that's the same as me. I've started about 3 or 4 of them. I've taught a couple of them. but it seems like what a MOOC is, it's a free online course. And maybe what you should all do is your homework for today, go to Coursera, that's the biggest company, an American company. They have about 400 and some odd MOOCs that are running that allow you to take a university course for free. And they have quizzes, and you can sit down with your son or your based MOOCs, but there's the European ones in blue. It's become a universal phenomenon because it gets the knowledge out there. And public universities do it to increase their profile, but also to give back to the taxpayer and say, look, we get a lot of taxpayers' money. This is another way we can give that money, we can give that service back. And my second last slide is this is the Ubuntu.net, who is a high-speed internet provider that shows their network. But notice how they have two strategies: create the linkages and networks among experts in the diaspora and those in the home country, and two, to give mobility schemes so that they can relocate them for short-term teaching and research assignments. Well, I would suggest that they don't have to necessarily relocate them, but they have to make those connections and use to bring people together without having to travel great distances. But we can learn a lot by meeting virtually, and it costs so much less both to the planet as well as to our own pocketbooks. So, two commercials. This is the journal that I edited for many years. It's free and open to anybody. There is a regional special issue that we did on Africa in 2009. And this is the Athabasca University Press, and this is the series that I edited, the Issues in Distance Education. And all of these books, there's now, every book that Athabasca University Press publishes is free for download, but these are the distance education ones, and there's 9 of these books, and any of them, you can buy them, but you can also just click on them and download them. So, in summary, distance education can be affordable, and it's expanding access in Africa and around the globe. But it's not a universal solution to all problems. It can be done very well or it can be done very poorly. It provides opportunity and incentive for change and innovation in both the public and the private sector. And it can be a powerful tool for increasing the impact of the African diaspora, not only impact in Africa, but within America and within other countries as we start to network and build on values that are important to us. So, thank you very much. And these slides, you can download them if you wish. And I don't know how much time we have, but any comments or questions are welcome.
Thank you. Senator Pittman from Oklahoma City. I just wanted to ask you what your personal thoughts are on the Abundant Solutions Alliance. Are they a network in Africa, or are they connecting Africa?
Right. I should say, first of all, that I only know what I found on the net about it, so I have no personal knowledge. But what they are is, it's like we have in Canada a network, a high-speed network that connects all the universities and research centers. And this does that in Africa too, so they're mostly a hardware company, but they have on the side this idea that we can use these to work with the diaspora. Because they're in one of their articles, they talk about the brain drain from Africa being a real challenge for them. Because as soon as somebody gets well trained, get their PhD, whatever, they're off to some other country. And so they're trying to bring back that knowledge. Yeah.
Let me answer Dr. Terry just gave. The Ubuntu group is sort of a free-form group that wants to get technology spread out worldwide. And most of the stuff they're doing is for free and open source. So most of the stuff they have available, you can get it online, and it's zero cost.
Right, thank you.
Elizabeth Lars from the YWCA in Oklahoma City. So my question is really regarding like the accreditation for the majority of the online courses and stuff like that. When you're offering online courses and to mass majority, are they as credible to people who are looking to hire or anything like that? Like, how does it work exactly?
Sure. Well, even courses like Harvard gives distance education courses. So there is a prejudice among some employers, and there's also people who are their own institution, and the way I went to school must be the best kind of an attitude. So there is discrimination against graduates of distance education universities. It's much less than it was in the past. And most of the universities who give online courses, they don't mark it on your transcript given by online or distance. It's a regular course and you get a regular degree. So my own university, as I said, we have 40,000 students and we have 0 courses that are given in the traditional way. And over 30 years, we've built up a reputation because the students who succeed at distance education are often more motivated and more organized than those who come to campus. And I think employers are starting to realize that. But I would be disingenuous to say that it's equal because there's a lot of what school did you go to and a lot of prejudice from the past.
Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
One more hand in the back, but Dr. Creswell, do you mind if we
No, I don't mind.
while you're getting set up? Okay, no minute.
Yeah, Dr. Anderson, I've got 2 questions.
Oh, man, I gave you the floor for 1 and 1, 2. Come on, please. No, come on, stand up.
Is there any data that education and regular on-site education?
Yes.
How do these 2 compare? And my second question is, does distance education does it work across all disciplines, science, art, and what are the challenges there?
Great questions. To answer the first one, is it as effective? That's the most asked question in 20 years of distance education, and the answer is no significant difference. Because distance education students are often more motivated, they're often older, they often work harder, so their grades come up to the same. And there was some recent study from the US about K-12 distance education, and they found superior results to students who are studying distance education. Not a large amount, but so there are literally been hundreds of studies on that very topic, and most of them find there's no difference in achievement of output. And your second question was?
Is it effective across all disciplines?
All across all disciplines. Well, you can find a teacher who will say, this is good for their subject, it's not good for my subject because of this or this. But distance educators have figured out ways to teach every discipline. And what they do in many of even our own university is, for science labs, wet labs, we bring students in, we rent labs at regular universities when they're not being used. They have work placements with mechanics. You can do it if you really try to. It's more challenging with some disciplines than with other ones, but I don't think there is a discipline that hasn't been taught like this in some places.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. We're going to take a